we've already discussed, and we'll get through the rest of them. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Actually, I thought what we would do today, we'll finish this text. I promised you a Sangam poem which has a happy ending. I'll read that. And then I want to talk about the technique. This technique of Uldurai Uvamam. We'll look at the grammatical statements that formalize it and try to understand it in a slightly deeper way. And then I want to do a small experiment with you, reading an Aham poem from a much later period. I haven't ever tried to do this with people outside a very limited group of experts that I wanted to experiment today, but I think it's worth it. We'll have tea, and then afterwards we'll at least make a beginning on the Bhakti materials. Okay, that's what I did. So we all have the text, the Guru Nuru text. Everybody has. Yeah. Good.
No, it's okay. Yeah. Don't worry.
Oh, starting at the bottom. I remembered last night after we finished that I actually once had a direct encounter with the wild boar. I don't know if that's something that is true of anybody else in this room. Is that the case? Yeah, they're best. Actually, it's important because it's one thing to read about them in a poem, but actually when you see the thing, it's a very frightening, big, huge, fierce, ferocious animal and rather dangerous. And I mean, unfortunately, in my case, I was hiking on a mountain somewhere in the Galilee. It took a look at me, I guess decided I was harmless or relatively harmless, and it moved off rapidly, though, I have to say, into the brush. But that should somehow be in our minds as we're reading this, because remember, this boar is somehow some image of the lover, the Kalaivan hero. So you have to imagine that these attributes of this kind of, rough, fierce, ferocious quality, that's got to be part of what the poet is. So I'll just read through the first three verses again, then we'll look at the So, a fierce boar who feeds on soft millet, sleeps on the lower slopes littered with heavy stones in the land of that man. Is it because he's afraid of what our Father knows that he doesn't come? A fierce boar who feeds on tiny shoots of millet lives with his mate on the rocky slopes, there in the land of that man. He wants me. His desire will come back. But my friend, does he know what would truly heal? Remember I said to you that second verse is actually kind of jagged, uneven syntax. Okay. A black touchstone, a boar, feeds on ripe golden millet in the hills of that land. He's come back, my friend, and with him my beauty has come again. So, and remember the last thing we said, that third verse, he's come back, but it's not entirely sure that this belongs in the past tense. The verb is in the past tense, but it could be the chi is thinking ahead of what will happen. He will have come back, and then my beauty too will come back. Or maybe he came and paid a visit. He can't come. Okay, so number 4. In the hills gleaming with water of your land, the direct address to the Kalaivan hero, right? A boar, tusks curved like the crescent moon, makes love to his maid, dark as carissa fruits. Better look hard at the eyes, all too pale of this woman. It's love. Carissa is what's called in Tamil kalave. It's a kind of dark plum-like fruit, and I'm not very good at fruits.
It might be kokum.
What is that?
I think it might be kokum.
How come I don't know? What I learned from Wikipedia is that the unripe fruit is poisonous, but the ripe fruit is tart and nutritious. So if that indeed is true, you could understand maybe why the poet has chosen this fruit, because there's something about ripeness or lack of ripeness. It says here, the Talaivi heroine must be somehow like this ripe fruit. Tart, maybe, a little sour and tart, but also delicious. Right? She's mature. There's a big question as to whether the Talaivan, the man, is actually ripe for this relationship. That's a pretty common thing in these poems. Yeah, please. I wanted to highlight, it's just, that's me, of course, there's no, I just wanted to highlight the direct address. And also that, I think, gives you some sense of the context in which this little poem is being recited or sung. See, here it's as if it must be the Tori, the girlfriend, right? And now she's not talking indirectly, which is the standard thing. We talked about that yesterday. I'll have more to say about that indirect speech. She seems to be talking directly to the Talaiva, right? So in your land, that's why it's emphasized. But look at the hills are gleaming with water. That means the rain must have come after the dry season. So that too is important. And there's something here also about time. Remember I said all of these poems, Sangam poems, they're heavy with time, kind of pregnant with time. They're constantly sort of saying things, focusing on a particular moment, especially in terms of the notion of ripeness. She's ripe and waiting for him. She's completely ready. And he, remember this boy is sleeping on the mountain and all of that? So this is what's in Tamil, it's called Nariadu. That means don't miss the moment, the right moment, the moment where it will be fertile. It's like a wasted moment, a wasted ripeness, a wasted fertility. And he's very capable of wasting it. We know that. Right? Like that wild boar. There's another thing here. There's this phrase, you'd better look hard. We actually don't read what this means. It's a form which has disappeared completely from later Tamil, old Tamil, Sangam period Tamil. Kandihum. Some kind of what we would call a modal form. Nobody knows exactly what it means. It's gone from, and there's no evidence as to what it actually means. It's Kandihum. Kandihum is Kandu and some kind of ihum suffix, but we don't exactly know what it means. But it must be some modal form. That means something like you ought to look, you had better look, you really should look, you must look. It must be something like that. Some example of the language that has changed. You'd better look hard at the eyes, all too pale, of this woman who has loved you. Notice this kind of poignant way of saying it. She has loved you. Ayan Dol. She's loved you. That's a strong statement. The implication is that maybe he hasn't loved her very well. Or maybe he loved her and no longer loves her. Or something like that. But also there's an interesting contrast here because this boar, right, with the tusks curved like the crescent moon, this boar makes love to his mate. And she's ripe, apparently, like that kalaba fruit. So the boar here is a very positive image, it seems. And the Tori is speaking to the Talaiva. Right? Positive image. Not very, there's a kind of contrast built into this image vis-a-vis the suitor, the lover. Right? There's some kind of contrast. That's important. You should notice that this ulurai uvamam, this way of making a reference, a kind of, remember this notion of a kind of comparison, a simile that lives inside somewhere. Ulurai uvamam, I'm going to say some more about it in just a moment. You'll notice that it can work in more than one way. It can be a direct or indirect statement about the lover or the beloved, but it can also be a statement about them that is in contrast with them, not a direct reflection of what they are. That's always possible. Okay, anybody else want to say something about number 4, please? As soon as you think of something or have a reaction of any sort, just don't be but to yourself, like,
Yeah, I was thinking just about
Yeah.
like it is about whether negative or positive kinds of things that you are making. I think it can be coexistence of both also.
yeah,
It can be coexistence of both. Like sometimes you are feeling that way,
right.
another point you are feeling like that.
Yeah, that's a good point because here we have 10 poems and the nuances of the emotion shift a lot, actually. It's not always a kind of, in fact, it's almost never a single kind of monolithic feeling. It's not like that. It's shifting hues and nuances, very sensitive emotional pictures. That's the beauty of this kind of poetic grammar, is it allows you to do that, to make very subtle, delicate statements, precise statements, partly, by mixing the landscapes like we spoke about yesterday. That's one possibility. And there are other means that the poet has. Okay, let's read 5. So he forgot. Marandanan, he forgot. Remember, we're interested in the model of the mind. So one mental activity is one can forget. Actually, it happens a lot in this moment. So he forgot. The man from the hills where a boar with crooked tusks guards young piglets, striped and tender, after their mother was killed by a tiger. Kind of hits you. He has left me behind, me and his golden son. So it's clear who's speaking. Who's speaking here? The Kalaidi, his beloved. And the boar, boar is taking care of these piglets. Others dead, killed by a tiger. Boar is kind of looking after these little piglets. But he, the Talaivan, she says, has left me behind. And now, for the first time, we find out that there's a baby. There is a son. Suddenly, the whole picture becomes a lot more complex. It's not only that he doesn't want to come and live with her and marry and stay with her, but actually she's had a baby. The modern commentators have something to say about this verse. They think that this is a prophetic or proleptic statement, that he hasn't actually left the woman behind. It's as if she were saying, and if I die, then what? In other words, if you don't come back and marry me, then I may die. So what she says is he has left me behind, me and his golden son. But the implication, that's the modern commentators, they think the implication is that she may die of love and loss of possibility. Okay, we'll go to 6. A boar with small eyes and big rage fights a big short-legged tiger in your land. As for us, we're embarrassed. In the eyes of the woman you love, frozen tears. Tears in most literatures are hot. Here they're cold. Panikanyu, they're frozen tears. Interesting about that. What do you think about that? No, I don't think so. I'm sure this isn't the only place, but I can't think of another example. Surprising in a way. We're used to having tears being hot. Right?
What's the original proposal? Original word proposal?
Funny. Icy, gooey, something cool. But remember that he's been mentioning the eyes before. In a few moments that we've seen about the woman's eyes. In 4, you'd better look hard at the eyes, all too pale. The eyes have become wide, pale. Now, these eyes, they have this frozen tear. And they're embarrassed. This is, again, must be the Tori speaking, right? She must be speaking. In the eyes of the woman you love, she's talking to him. I don't know how exactly she's talking to him. Maybe he's meant to overhear this. In the eyes of the woman you love, frozen tears. So here we have this kind of repetition, which is actually, we said yesterday, not really a repetition, but something else. So I have something more to say about that. We'll finish the poem and then we'll come back to this question. This is a recursion, not a repetition. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. Look at 7. A boar with small eyes and big rage. Same formula we had before. A boar with small eyes and big rage eludes the bowmen on the rocky slopes and grabs the growing rice from the land of Cincinnati. And once scared for this girl, her hair heavy with beads. The hair is dark. Beads. Now he speaks treacherous words, certain will deceive them. So we talked about this yesterday for a moment. There's an interesting statement here in the modern commentaries. They say it's a little hard to understand the ulurai in this case. That various interpretations are possible. But I want to remind you of what I said yesterday. If you have an ulurai ugama, it has to be capable of paraphrase. You have to be able to say what it actually means. You have to be able to restate it in normal prose. At the same time, remember I said that the paraphrase will never exhaust the meaning of the ulurai. It will tell you what it means, tell you what the suggestion is, but it will never exhaust the meaning. There will always be more left over, some residue of meaning, maybe the most important part. Remember I said there's a kind of movement within the poem, usually classic Tamil poem. There's this sort of oscillation back and forth. It sets up a kind of uneasy movement in the mind. So, what do you think? What about this boar eluding the bowmen on the rocky slopes? What's that all about? Think why? What's the boar? Why? It's sort of strange thing to say. Yeah, that's right. I think that's what I would think. Actually, something like that.
What did you say, dear?
That it's like the first verse with the father on guard and waiting. And this lover, somehow he's managed to sneak into the house, or maybe he's taken her outside somewhere, got away from the father. Something like that. That would be the natural thing in a way. Yeah. Even not so specific, but he has an elusive quality, this guy. Yeah. He comes and goes, and you can't really know. Yes, I think that's true. And she says also in a kind of sarcastic way, the land of this man who once cared for this girl. I said, no longer cares. Actually, the poem's progressed a little bit. We're getting towards the end of it, but it's like it's a stronger statement, stronger and stronger with this suspicion or suggestion that he doesn't care very much. Something like that. There's some crystallized notion of this boar-like lover. Right? Just as you said, what's your name? Go. Yeah, please. Right, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's an important thing. What do you think about that? Why? What is that?
Isn't it the delta?
See, that's coming back. We'll see it in just a second. The whole movement from millet to rice. First of all, the mountains, and then there's the rice that grows down below. Yeah, but on the other hand, there's a counter movement, because as you'll see in just a second, it goes up the mountain. In any case, there's some kind of interesting movement alteration there. Millet is the mountain slope of this clandestine, surreptitious union. And rice is this settled, married world like of the things. And he's moving towards that. Look what he says, actually. Let's read 8 and 9, because there it becomes very clear. I'll read both of them together. The striped piglet holding tight, the mother dead. A boar feeds with him on sparse millet on the rich mountainside where hunters go. Sleeps on the high peak in the fine map. It's that map, the high peak. What good will come if he goes away, leaving us? In Payakumo. What use will be to his? So the implication here, again, this is what the modern commentators say, the implication, what good will come if he goes away leaving us behind, implication is that she'll die. She's going to die. So here's a general thing to pay attention to in poems like this, these aham poems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a general thing that you should pay attention to, which is that these poems tend to take place on the boundary between life and death. The natural setting of an aham poem is somewhere between life and death. There's a possibility of death. The intensity of the feeling, the viraha, separation. Remember we talked about these states of increasing, intensifying separation. It's getting worse and worse. So always there's the possibility that one of them might die. It's usually the woman who's in acute danger, dying from longing, yearning, unsatisfied love. So here too, and here she says it in a very subtle way, if he goes away, leaving us behind, what good will come? In other words, what's left in my life? These are boundary poems. Now, back to the rise. So here in number 9, it's important first. Reeds, rooted up by a bore in the wasteland, are as close as you get to paddy growing in the field. Here we're back to that. In the land of that man who hasn't come. That man who hasn't come. If he stays there, taking his own time, while you weep, girl, with bangles on your wrists and oil in your hair, I'm sure to lose a friend. Not only that, it's my own stupid fault. So who is speaking? It's an unusual phrase. Who is talking here? Who is speaking? It's the friend. This is the girlfriend she's speaking, and she's speaking to the lively heroine, right? Yeah, why did she say that? Why did she say that? So you have to assume.
She brought them together.
What is that?
She brought them together?
Yeah, she brought them together, or at the very least, she was perhaps some kind of duty, some kind of go-between. And in fact, we've seen that already in these verses, right? She's been sent to somehow give a message to him to say, look, better come and decide to marry her. If you don't, she might die. There are all kinds of things that she's implying by the way she describes the boar, right? You know, she may be standing outside his door. That's a very standard thing. She might be standing outside his door. She hasn't actually made direct contact. She speaks, hoping or almost certain that he will overhear it. And she has a message for him. So now, in this moment, which is a moment close to despair, I think, right? Sounds like things are not looking too good for the lively at this point. In that moment, she says, I'm sure to lose a friend, meaning the girlfriend's going to die. And it's just my own stupid fault. In the sense that maybe she didn't give the message in a powerful enough way, or an eloquent enough way. Maybe she didn't state it right. Maybe she had no control over the language, the way the thing developed. My own stupid fault. Some kind of guilt or shame or something like that reverts upon the speaker. And there's another thing about that, which is, just like we saw in 7, look back on 7, this is a statement about language and talking. So it's another one of those moments, very common in these poems, where the poet throws in something about this business of writing a poem, of saying things with words, saying consequential things, talking about very important words that might change somebody's life. Remember, I said at the beginning, we're talking about pragmatic and causal models. The model that is implicit in this thing is going to be like that. The poet has to say something. He says, my own stupid fault. This poet, looks like perhaps I didn't say it right. Meenakshi, you wanted to say something? No? Oh, the heroines, okay. Yeah. No, it's a female. These are two. So actually, again, another thing in this verse, it's a confessional verse, right? Very personal confessional verse. And secondly, here again, that theme about time, that he stays there taking his own time. So, Urainidin, that he lingers there. He has his own inner rhythm, apparently, and it's a slow rhythm. I've seen it already several times. This fascination with these different temporal rhythms. Time. He stays there. He has all the time in the world. She's about to die, so see the urgency, and you also see the despair. But the poem is actually built up to a kind of moment of despair right before the end of it. Now you begin to see also the way this kaligam of 10 verses is structured. Little by little, the picture becomes clearer and clearer. There's this boar, this kind of boorish boar, sleeping on the hill, right? Ignoring everything else. And look at how she's suffering. We don't know what he thinks and what he feels. And he once loved her, and she loves him. That's said explicitly. Not so sure that he still loves her. Is he going to come or not come? Is there some way to make him come? So that's an important question, actually, because look what happens in the final. So let's read the final verse. On the slopes where boars dig up roots, the forest folk have harvested the young millet and moved on. And she just looks at that mountain, shorn of beauty, lonely as lament, her eyes filled with tears. And he noticed, he's come, the one without. Surprise ending, after all that we've been reading, this fierce boar and all of that, suddenly he's come. He took notice, right? He actually paid attention. That's a really, really critical thing. I think that next week when we talk about the 16th century materials and we talk about the new model of the mind, we'll spend a few minutes talking about attention and paying attention. It's a really important theme. And any time that we're concerned with what goes on in the mind, that theme should be there in some way. So here it is actually explicitly in the poem. Right? He actually noticed. It's as if it took him a long time to actually notice. She had those frozen tears in her eyes. The Tori actually let him know that she was crying, right? But he didn't really pay any attention. But finally he noticed. Right? Another interesting thing here in this verse is, first I want you to see there's a phrase in Tamil, Kulambig Pol Neruvarai. The mountain that is lonely as lament. So, everything we've said until now, we've seen all of these external features, the boar, the landscape, the millet, the mountain, all of these things, they're outside, right? And they're meant to somehow express or resonate with or reflect or something else, as we'll see in a moment, some internal state. And that's the law of this poetry. So everybody's seen that now, right? Is there anybody, do you have any question about that so far? Because what's really interesting in this verse is suddenly it turns out it also works the other way. It's the mountain which is lonely.
Because he's not on it.
What do you say?
Because he's not on it anymore.
Yeah, maybe because no longer on it. No, I think, maybe. When she looks at the mountain, her eyes fill with tears. Something happens, it happens pretty fast in this tiny little poem, right? Because at the beginning of the poem, he's still not there, apparently, right? And so she's looking at this mountain, that's his home, and her eyes fill with tears, right? And the mountain, too, has lost its beauty, and it's lonely as this Kulambu lament. So the mountain actually, that to me is a very striking thing about it. The mountain also can be lonely. Should never, in a Tamil Sangha poem, should never underestimate the emotional power of what looks like it's an external object. Never. These objects are alive, they breathe, they have wuyir. Remember we talked about it yesterday? They have wuyir, and they have feelings, and the mountain too can be lonely. It comes at the very end of the poem, and a very striking phrase. That mountain is lonely.
Beautiful projection of our spirit.
Well, you could call it like that. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. We'll talk about it together, because that's a very critical thing. We haven't yet really said anything very clear about how this thing works, how this Buddha really works. We've seen it actually working in the poem, empirically. That's the more important thing in a way. But nonetheless, I want to take a few minutes and talk about the mechanism of it, because that's where it touches upon the way the mind operates and thinks and feels.
I was struck by the the forum use of balls.
Yes. You're right.
As a ball.
Yeah.
And all the schools were balls. And the last line, the one dot.
Yeah.
So in my mind, there is all kinds of fantasies
Yeah.
generating
Yeah.
in mind. I think the relationship between the two women is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I don't see the woman, the woman, just as some neutral woman.
That's true.
They both love them.
Mm.
And in that sense, there's a possibility of betrayal. I don't know, one
I mean,
is that.
what you're saying is absolutely correct for Sanskrit love poetry, no doubt, because there's like many, many verses, probably hundreds of verses where the duty who's been sent with a love message actually seduces the man or seduces the man.
That's not true.
But yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe I can't say. I think it's true that the Tori has a presence that is not a purely formulaic presence. That is true. She has her own innerness or inness. Aham. I call it sometimes inness. Some inside God. She definitely has some. We could today say some subjective presence. Big modern word, but she has something like that. It's not just some technical. That's certainly the case. Whether she's in love, maybe she's. I don't know. It's possible. As I say, in Sanskrit love poetry, it's absolutely conventional to have that notion, and there are many poems where the heroine complains to the duty in a very bitter and sarcastic way about what she's
But the
done.
actual Tamil word in we love, what is that word for love?
Kadal.
Then it is obvious.
Yeah, the desire. Well, but they're always talking in the plural. In these cases, and you'll see it in just a minute in the next one. There's a tendency to speak in the plural. I wouldn't read too much into that, although it is true that it's a plural. And the boars, that's an interesting point. Suddenly there's a lot of boars, right? That's quite an interesting moment. At the moment of transition, when he's about to leave that mountain slope and start moving into that rice cultivation area and get married, it seems.
It's kind of expansion to it. It's sort of a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And then it comes into the meeting of eyes.
Yeah.
It's like a cinematic.
Yeah, it is like that. Actually, cinematic effects are extremely present here. Yes, please.
If you take it for granted, it actually comes there because it could also be wish fantasy continuing.
That's true. Like we saw before. Could be that. But, well, what do you think? Do you think he's not come? Or do you think she's just crying? He won't come?
I think it's going on. She's continuing to wish.
Yeah. It's a very, technically speaking, it's a past tense verb, unequivocally past tense in Tamil. But we already had an example where their past tense might very well have been some wishful thinking. But on the other hand, this is the final statement in this poem. After 10 verses, it's sort of worked up to some point, and I think that transition takes place at the end, just in the last line of this 4-line verse. I think that's an eloquent transition. To my mind, I think maybe he really did come. There's no way to say with any definitiveness, and we don't even have a medieval commentary on the end, so we don't even know what the great commentators of the 13th and the 14th century thought about this. So we don't know. My feeling is that probably he's come back. Maybe he's not come back to stay. I don't know, but he's come. He's come back. Things at the moment are very good.
And this, when you mentioned this at the turning point, like when she looked at the mountain, and I had a personal reading, which might be an over reading. It seems like the moment she has given up, and like she looked at the mountain, loneliness, and her eyes filled with tears. Her eyes filled with tears, and he noticed. The moment she had completely given up, and beyond care, and at that point, like the tide turned, and it seems to me like that.
Figure like that back until she was completely despairing. It wasn't going to achieve his notice. He might not even notice. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, could be. Because after all, let's not forget, they're in some kind of relationship, these two people. Not just they're somehow connected to one another.
the other elements in the like they're all going to a cycle.
Mm.
That's what
Yeah.
and then the dimensions of what's happening.
Right.
Or what sort of there are all these things like the harvest. So
Yeah.
moving from tender shoots to ripe.
Yes.
and then
Right. Yeah.
then another cycle, another
Right.
harvest.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are so many elements like that. It's all like coming back.
It sort of looks like from the early part of this last verse, as if indeed something has changed altogether. These four people, they've harvested the millet, and they've moved on, they've moved on to some other. So something has changed. And maybe that is fullness at this point. Finally, after going through all these kind of beginnings and false starts and hesitations and fears, suspicions, agonies, all of that, it moves on. The life has moved on, and moved on maybe in the way that it's come back. It's pronounced. Yeah, yeah.
Is it common for women also to be millet that's
Well, I don't think so, actually. I don't think so. The women are connected to the millet, though. There's an intimate relation between millet and the women, because a classic situation in which the Laban meets the Levi, she sits on a little kind of platform in the field, the millet field, and her job is to chase away the birds who want to come and eat the growing crop. For that, and she has a cry, she cries like that. She's supposed to sit there for hours, young girl. And so this hunter usually will come and see her, and they fall in love. That's the standard thing. And there are actually some very, very beautiful poems, including an Anglo this particular anthology, about this business of harvesting the millet and what's left. They harvest these forest people, they harvest the millet, but then there's still a few little bits of the stalks that are left in the fields. The parrots, they've been living off this millet, and now they're still sort of frantically trying to find some last little bit of nourishment before they too have to leave. It's a tragic situation. And also, of course, reflects upon the love. So there's a relation between the woman and the millet. I don't think here so much about it. So, the last thing I think it's important to say there is, remember, we were talking about pragmatic and causal relations, right? So it's very frequent in Tamil poetry that the poem itself, you read it through to the end, it somehow produces the result that it is aiming at in the beginning. And, this is, on the one hand, it looks like it's a kind of formal feature. Can you all hear me in the back? To the front? It looks like it's a sort of formal feature, and maybe one shouldn't overstate it. But actually, I think there's a pan-South Indian theory of language, which we see in the Tamil poem, and in the grammar that goes with it, and in actually all of the literature. That has to do with the transformative and effectual powers of language. You say something, you say it in the right kind of way, it should change the world. And above all, it applies to a poem. So within the poem, we have this kind of ongoing conversation that eventually produces the change that is being sought after. So I just want you to take notice of that. I'm going to show you another example of this. That's something we can come back to, because I think that's a fundamental thing. This is a South Indian notion. It's very different from Sanskrit notions. Yeah, please.
Just to kind of what she was saying and what maybe Wisdom was also saying, it's a very populated kind of illness.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
Okay, well, that's exactly what I want to speak about. Before I do that, I want to read the grammatical material about this Ulurai Upamam. So you'll see at least what the Tamil tradition itself said about it. And then we'll try to talk. I want to address exactly that question. It's overpopulated. It's not just populated. It's an overpopulated inness. And the outness also, the Puram, is also heavily populated, with all kinds of feelings like that loneliness. We have to try to understand the way those things work. I mean, one can state the relation in a kind of simplistic way, but you can also state it in a much more kind of interesting and powerful way. So we'll try to do that in just a moment. So before we do that, I promised you this one poem with a happy ending, right? So let's read it. Anybody have anything else to say about the Bora?
The
Yeah.
man owns the land. Is not related to it.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
The man owns the land. And
Yeah.
the-
He's some chieftain or king, something like that.
the-
He's usually it's like that. It's usually, I mean, the Tolkapian grammar tells you who is, a proper hero for one of these poems. It can't just be anybody. It should be some relatively noble, high-born person, like a prince or a king, a warrior, somebody like that. Only much later, there's an anthology called Kaliptohai, which is usually said to be later. Although I'm not at all sure that that's the case, but let's assume it's later. In Kaliptohai, you have everybody. There are all kinds, the whole social spectrum, it's all there. And all kinds of marginal types, like low groups, high, everything's there, hunchbacks, cripples, everything is in Kaliptohai. It's a different kind of anthology. In some ways, it's the most neglected of the anthologies. It's very difficult to read. Can we date it? Well, it's what people will tell you, but that's all a fiction. They'll say it's maybe 4th or 5th century, that is towards the end of this Sangha period. But I'm not at all sure that dating is the whole question of the relative dating of these technologies. It's a very kind of contentious issue. And the truth is, we have no true basis in facts, that is, in some kind of external evidence that would allow us to make a decision. I believe that someday something may well turn up that will completely change our way of thinking about the dating, but so far we don't.
Something about the curry. I mean, if you think about rice being fertile, and then you have reference to water.
Yeah.
Whereas millets generally grow even on dry land.
It's a dry land crop.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And also, I think the hero does come because there is a reference to water.
Yeah.
Water kind of
Yeah.
fulfillment.
That's what I think.
And
Yeah.
also, I also think that this kind of art maybe also involved in some way because if you see the 9, just the paragraph before 10,
Right.
she's referring to herself.
Yes.
For her doing as a stupid for.
That's right.
So I do think that maybe.
Yeah, but it's a nice reading. I am happy with that. Another way to state it is a sort of general principle. You could say, you have these stock characters, right? And there are not very many of them. But together they constitute a field of force, and it's a very rich emotional field. And every one of them has a place in that field. It's as if the reality that was being described was like that. It's constituted by this tremendous interactive, mutual projections and fantasies and feelings. That's the world that we're living in. By the way, I'm sorry, somebody else wanted to say something? Yeah, just one second, just one moment. I just want to say, by the way, in my experience of these poems, we're talking about a very real world. You remember I said yesterday, one question, if you're going to talk about the mind, I want to know in what kind of world this mind is operating, whether it's some kind of fantasy world, or whether it's really hard facts, or some kind of concrete objects, something like that. I think these Tamil poems are highly realistic. They take place in a world that is solid and there. Very realistic world. My sense. Yeah, well, more than real, it should be imagined, but it is also imagined. I'll say something about that. Please.
When you talk of emotional heat, I also think that if you look at the board, it's a very interesting character in the sense that he has balance and caring. He protects the piglets.
Yeah.
He fights with the short-legged tiger.
Right.
To save the piglets.
Yeah.
And is it also part of this woman's image of the man, or admiration for the man?
Yeah.
So that man is also a very much part of the rich emotional field that you're talking about.
Yeah.
The board is a character in his own right.
Yeah. True. Well said. I mean, very well said. I agree completely. Nicely said. Yeah. Meenakshi,
So I might be wrong. But that's the point that both the love with the had an experience with different individuals, and
Yeah.
that is how they relate.
I don't know. Maybe. That's how it is.
Nowhere she is guilty, but nowhere she's feeling sorry or sad about it.
So,
Maybe she had an experience in the
Yeah.
past. So,
I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe. I don't know. These poems, it's funny. These poems are kind of odd mixture of immense economical understatement. It's unbelievably economical. There's like just a little tiny flash, every syllable counts. And at the same time, enormous emotional implication. And one can do with that, whatever one wants in a way. So yeah, I don't maybe. I don't know. The modern commentators wouldn't think so, but the modern commentators tend to be a little puritanical. So maybe they're completely wrong. I have no idea about that.
no, that's one of
Yeah.
the bodies that have I kind of confident. The man is always less than the world.
Yeah.
The
Somehow.
what the man aspires to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Well, I mean, there's a range, right? Yeah, there is the tenderness. She said, absolutely, no question. This boy is looking after the babies. And yeah, fighting the tiger. He said, yeah, that's no question. But the other side of it is also there. It's a kind of rough, ferocious animal, goes to sleep.
I don't know how you are reading like it's very realistic because I think definitely the Nexon context is very much real, but again it's like a suggestive kind of meaning. Like if you like talking about Mulay.
Yeah.
So Mulay is not just about like the people who are coming from that region is writing about that.
Yeah.
So Mulay become a kind of landscape archetype.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that of course is true. We're dealing with a conventionalized poetical grammar. No doubt about that. It comes with a whole set of features that constitutes this language. Which is that in a way is what it is, a kind of grammaticalized language for poetry. And these features are the building blocks of what they're going to say. That doesn't mean though that it's not entirely real. Right? My feeling is that they're talking about landscapes that they know and external objects that are certainly there. And they're not just some kind of projection of the life. There's more to it, I think.
Picking up on what she had said about that quote was sort of in my mind about the paddy and the millet.
Yeah.
I've done some work in Rajasthan, and I'm thinking of that. I got
Yes.
Get a very, very, very clear grid about that. This is Rajasthan. That millet, sorghum, and corn do not blend. They are absolutely distinct. But you could argue with that position. I think the theory has all understanding, in this case, culture, life practice, around this theories. And so the idea of bringing paddy and millet within the same terrain, now this is possible perhaps in Tamil Nadu, people
At least in the poetry it's possible. I don't know.
I'm just wondering, one had to take, because there are many songs, separation, waiting for the man to return, betrayal, all of that stuff. But they would not have this kind of they would be for very, in a sense, clear landscape. Somewhat more, afforded landscape. This is more fluid. What I'm sensing.
I think it is probably more fluid. That's true. But the what they call the karuporo, that define which is the landscape, they're given. In other words, these are the building blocks you have to use. Within that, however, I think that it's a highly realistic.
What's the value of it? Because if it refers to Ragi, which is also called autocomplexes, it can go on higher altitudes without irrigation. So the rice,
T9, as I thought, yeah, T9. T9, not T9, but T9.
yeah, it is something like Ragi, which can grow without irrigation.
Yeah, it's a dryland crop.
Whereas rice
needs.
Absolutely.
Tina.
Yeah, Ina. We call it Ina.
Tina. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nine. Tamil is
Ina. There was something else in my mind, but it slipped my mind now. We'll come back. Any other last thoughts on the board? Yeah, please. Yeah, maybe. Absolutely.
There again, there is
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the historians have done that. I mean, there are plenty of books about that. People have tried to reconstruct the Sangam period Tamil society on the basis of these facts. So, people have written some very interesting things. There's a man who, some of you know here, Deva Deva, this young Nadiga scholar.
That's why I was saying.
Yeah, he wrote a very interesting essay exactly along those lines, trying to draw a picture of this Tamil, old Tamil society, not in a kind of simplistic way, but actually trying to take the various hints and information and see what they can.
But
it
again,
lends
very,
itself to that.
I will say that again, the reading is very helpful to
It is.
one-to-one.
Yeah.
That maybe not generate that kind of surplus meaning.
Well, okay, I remembered what I wanted to say actually from the connection. So, see, think of the opposite pole. I'm calling this realistic. But what is the opposite? I mean, there are various possibilities. But one would be to think of a Nagarjuna kind of world. So what does Nagarjuna say? He says that reality itself is comprised of, actually made of, constituted by these interwoven, interlocking projections of absolutely every living being. In other words, that's what constitutes the world. The world is not, trees that are actually growing somewhere and rocks and rivers and things like that, but it's constituted by these projected perceptions that are somehow interacting with one another. That creates a kind of very dense, thick web within which you could also write poetry, right? And indeed, they do. They do. These Buddhist Mahayana poets, Tibetan poets, they write poetry, but the underlying sort of, you could say, ontological assumptions are going to be something else. But this isn't so much like that. But it's good we're talking about it because we'll be speaking, next week about this later material, the 16th century material, where the kind of basic, sort of formative, energetic role of the imagination is so central, so that even the trees and the rivers and all of that, they have something.
How do you see that's so crucial to the whole series of lectures, imagination? Do you not see imagination at work?
Oh, no, it's absolutely work. But I want to hold off on it just a moment, and I'll come back to that because that's indeed an integral element. What we don't have here, though, I'll say it now, is some kind of work through theory of the imagination. We have lots of imaginative practices,
No theory.
but no, as far as I can see, no clear theory of it. That's an important thing. But I'll say more about that in just a moment. Let's read this poem on page 5, I guess. Page 5. This poem begins, she heard the bustle of reading. Yeah, okay. So this is just to fulfill my promise of giving you a happy thank you poem. Actually, I like the poem a lot. This is from the anthology called Natri Night. Natri Night, an unusual poem. So here, you will remember that it's according to the standard sequence, a moment will come where the hero is going to actually leave altogether. Go away to look for money. He wants wealth. He's in search of wealth. So that moment is always kind of almost there. And here's a poem about that particular moment. So this is a slightly longer poem. Natrinai, these are longer poems, much longer than the Ainkururu poems, which are very short, 4 lines. It's a longer poem. And we have the name of the poet. You have it down below. Okay, so she heard the bustle of leaving. Cold tears came to her eyes. Cold tears came to her eyes, dark with mascara, like dew on flowers. When I called her, she came. Shyly, reluctant, very slowly. She didn't ask me anything or try to stop me, but like a finely painted doll, smudged, coming unstuck, her fragrant hair glistening, she was shaken, lost in thought. And then she sank onto my chest. My heart, still thinking about money, saw it, like an unbaked clay pot drenched by rain, took her in. Snap. So
Unbelievable.
he's not going anywhere. Came pretty close to leaving, but actually wasn't able. And the unbaked clay pot drenched by rain, that's a image that comes in Tamil poetry. I think it's clear to all of you. It's that the water turns the pot. It's not been baked, right? So just the clay itself. So when it rains on the pot, it turns back into the kind of unformed clay. Right? So clearly some sort of image of the two lovers melting into one another. You can see that his mind, look at this, that his heart, the heart, angel, still thinking about money. Yeah, he's honest enough to say that, right? He's still thinking about money, but that's a thought that is going to go away. This is actually a slightly unusual poem in the sense that here the hero is speaking. It's not a female voice. The hero is speaking about his own inner state. Describes it pretty detailed and rather moving way, I think. It describes what happened and offers you this moment where actually everything turns out okay. An unusual moment. There's nothing here that would fit the description of Ulurai Uvama. Absolutely nothing, as far as I can see. In other words, there's no reference to some external state at all. Yeah. What is it? Yeah. Well, like to on clouds, yeah. That's just a description of the tears that makes an emotional. And the other one, they finally painted down. Yeah, that's a very South Indian Tamil notion, this notion of by this wooden dowel or iron dowel or puppet. Actually, I'll give you another example. Continue to get to it today about the poems. For the whole phrase you want? Pabai. Okay. I would like you to turn to page 6, and let's at least take a few moments to talk about Ulurai, and then there's tea coming in for a few minutes. Okay, so that's fine. Enough time to look at so what I've done. So you remember, Ulurai, that's the central technique. This is something that the Tamil poets and grammarians somehow invented. Although it's kind of hard to know how they did this in a collective way, but there it is. They all share this language, and this is the main principle. And you can see that I've translated it a little differently than what I did yesterday. Yesterday I called these similes that inhabit the inside. But actually there's another way to read that phrase, because you can say, in this old Tamil, you can say, Ulluruttuda, that means you look at something by paying very close attention. It could be that the essence of this technique is exactly that. It's a particular kind of poetic attention. Okay? So here's, let's just quickly read the sutras. This is from the Tolkappiyam, that is the ancient grammar.
Yeah. Ask if you don't have a copy of the notes, to share it with someone, because it makes a big difference when you're looking at it. So if you don't have access to this, just move your seat a little bit and just read it, because it begins to make more sense.
Yeah, you really need that. I mean, we can project or
just share it.
We can, yeah. I mean, we won't be able to do it today. Next week, if you like, I can show it. Although, don't love doing it. Yeah, it's good. I prefer something like this. Yeah. You have copies of this? So we'll just quickly look at these sutras. Like all sutras, they're very short and concise and rather enigmatic. He says, Ulurai uvamame, yinai uruvamina, kalla lahum kinai marvahale. one can identify clearly the Tinai landscape by either Ulurai Uvamam or the other kind of simile. So you'll notice that this Procopian grammar, he knows that there are two kinds of simile. There's a standard simile when you say X is like Y. Your face is like the moon, right? That's the standard Upama. But there's this Ulurai Upama, which is something else. He knows it's something quite different. So what is it? He goes on to say those who know the marks of grammar say that Ulurai is meaningful with respect to the landscape markers, with the exception of deities. Each Tinai has its own deity. They're not part of this. Very interesting thought. I don't know exactly how to understand that, but I guess the feeling is that the gods cannot be located in a single landscape. And then he says, Ulurai Uvamam is articulating something by paying close attention to the indirect subject of comparison. Here it's that notion of an indirect subject that really matters. I'll have more to say about that. The other kind of simile offers direct knowledge of the subject. So here, surprisingly, it's one thing to say your face is like the moon, but if you do it with an Ulurai Uvamam, it will be much more effective. The more powerful way of expressing something like this is in this indirect way. Okay. Now, I just want to concentrate on the next sutra, and we're going to read the commentary of Hirasiriyara, the medieval commentators on this sutra. We'll see how this sutra was understood in the medieval period. Then we'll try to sum this up in some way that I think might make sense of it in a more general, modern way. So here's the main sutra for this kind of simile. It says, when a subject is not explicitly compared to something else, but is seen with reference to its point of origin, those well versed in the tradition can determine its meaning. Point of origin seems to be the Tinai landscape. So let's read. I want you to just follow what the commentator says. This is Pirasiriyara. So he's writing in the 13th century. This is a long time. This is hundreds of years after the Sangam poem. And a lot happened in those hundreds of years. A lot happened. So you can't be sure that actually Pirasiriyara really was able to reach some kind of conclusion that would have been appropriate to what the poets themselves intended. We don't know that. We may be talking about a distance of 800 years or more than that. But anyway, Pirasiriyara was a fantastic commentator, very great pleasure to read him, very amazing author with tremendous insight. He says very unusual things about the poems. In short, he was a good reader of Sangam poetry, there's no doubt about that, and he was immersed in the tradition. So let's see what he says. So he takes the words of the sutra, not compared to something else, as in a standard upama simile. Okay? With reference to its point of origin. That is, the landscape where it emerged, just as I said a moment ago. Well versed in the tradition, this is intended as a simile comparing X to Y as the tradition tells us. So there is a comparison, X to Y. Now, determine its meaning. He said that those well versed in the tradition can determine its meaning. He says, such and such an item is meant as a simile as those who have intuitive understanding, will be able to see. I want to stop for a moment. This is a really important point. In Tamil, like in most Indian languages, I think, we have various verbs for knowing. Usually there's a contrast. So, it's very plain, well known in Tamil. You have this root unar, this unarvu. Unar is a certain kind of knowing, but it's not a kind of heavily discriminatory analytical kind of knowledge. That is arivu. Arivu, there's a folk etymology in Tamil. It's a folk etymology. It's not correct. It doesn't matter. It says that arivu, the sort of standard kind of knowing, supposedly derived from the root ari, which means to chop things up. So if you chop everything up in a kind of analytical way, that's some kind of express cognitive knowledge. Unarvu is some kind of intuitive knowing. And it doesn't require, in fact, it's rather antithetical to that kind of analytical thought, and it's generally felt to be superior. Unarvu is a better way of knowing. Okay, that means knowing from inside, perhaps through some kind of sympathetic resonance or something. With that, and here we have Pirasiriyara telling us that if you want to understand an Ulurai Uvamam, you really need Unarvu, not Arivu. You need that intuitive knowledge. Okay? Then he says, that is, this will not be evident to just anybody, but only to those with fine understanding. Or it will come to the practice of course. Examples will follow. This technique is called simile, or rather, semblance of simile. It's a very nice term. A semblance of a simile. Now, this go on just another moment, because we have another commentator, an earlier commentator called Ilan Puranar. Ilan Puranar, again, a great commentator, it's a grammarian. So he defines this upamai poli, and he says, it's when you have the subject, the upamaya, and the object, upamana of the comparison, as the same. Let me explain that, just in case there's somebody who doesn't know it, that it's in a normal upama, and all of the literatures that we have, you say X is like Y, your face is like the moon, right? So the face is the upamaya. That is what you want to describe, right? That is what is being described. The moon, and by the way, this is a true statement. Every woman in this room has a face that is like the moon. But I'm happy to tell you that every woman in this room has a face that's like the moon in a distinctive and singular way. That's what the poeticians say. Very important to know that. It's not a blanket comparison. But that's the sort of basic pattern. You have the upamaya, which is being described, the subject, and the upamana, that is the standard of comparison of the object. Okay, everybody okay with that? That's rather important. Look what he says, Ilan Puranar. He says that upamai pola, this kind of ulurai upamam, that is this semblance of a simile, is when the subject and the object actually are the same thing. There is a figure in Sanskrit, there's an alankara, which actually embodies this idea. It's called the ananvaya. There are famous examples of it. If you say, for example, you can say, Ambaram sagaropamam, the sky is like the ocean. That's a true fact. Ambaram sagaropamam, sagaram chambaropamam, and the ocean is like the sky, also a true fact. But Rama Ravanayori Uddham, Rama Ravanayoriva. But the battle between Rama and Ravana was only like the battle between Rama and Ravana. It's a completely singular thing. There's nothing you can compare it to. That's called an anvaya. It's a well-known alankara in Sanskrit. Okay? But so look at what he says. Ilan Puranar says that's what this ulurai upalam is. It's something like that. In other words, it's something completely distinctive and singular. That's an important statement. Okay. Or he says it could be when the upamaya has no upamana. That is, there's something it's incomparable. There's no way to compare at all. Whatever it is. Or the upamana is invented by the poet's imagination but not found in nature. So here already, in the 13th century, we have a theory of the imagination. And then it really goes on to talk about how this term jives with the other term. So before we have 5 minutes, let me say a couple of things in these 5 minutes about how I think we might reformulate what we just read. Basing ourselves on what Peras has told us, and he told us we need a particular kind of understanding. Right? And the earlier commentator, Ilan Puranar, has said that it might be a case of absolute singularity. Every time you have an ulurai something which is not repeatable. So, the simple way to describe this, and this is what you'll find in all of the books about classical Tamil, simple and actually simplistic, is to say that this inner-outer comparison is a kind of reflection, kind of resonance. In other words, there's something outside. It reflects. It expresses by reflection or by resonating or by echoing something inside, and vice versa. That's one way to say it. And that's true, but I think it's not a very penetrating way of describing something which is actually rather different, of a different order and more. So how else might we describe it? So I wanted to read to you something that a young anthropologist, some of you may know the name of Anand Pandian, you know him? Anand Pandian is a young Tamil anthropologist. He's teaching at Johns Hopkins. He's a very original person in my estimation. He has a beautiful book of ethnography based on his fieldwork in southern Tamil Nadu called Crooked Stalks. Talking about the millet stalks, cricket stalks. Very interesting book. And he has a new book that just came out on Tamil cinema, which I highly recommend. Very unusual book. It's called Real. I don't know, real, R-E-E-L, real something. Sorry. Anyway, he discusses this technique on the basis of his field work. So that was interesting because we've been reading poems that may be 1500 or 1800 or even 2000 years old. But it turns out that the technique is alive and well in villages in southern Tamil Nadu. Not that it's a surprise to me, but just in case anybody had any doubt about it, Aham poetry and Ulurai Uvangam is alive and well. And he, he has a lot to say about it. We're not going to be able to go into all that he says, but he talks about Iram. Iram means moistness. Iram. But people use it in the sense of a kind of sympathetic moisture. And that means, well, he says, it's a moisture at the heart of the self that can also dry up. That's a big problem in general, is that our kind of liquid innerness tends to become brittle and dry up. And maybe that's the great problem. So he's talking about a moisture at the heart of the self. He says one inhabits a landscape rife with sympathetic feeling, molding perception. He's talking about something called opari, which is a genre of lamentation. And he says this opari means crying these imagined places by feeling with their imagined quality. That's Anand kind of trying to formulate what he heard
Say that
in
one
these
more
Tamil
time.
villages. Yeah. He says opari is to cry these imagined places, and that one cries them by feeling with their imagined qualities. Imaginative act of sympathetic moisture. In other words, you know or you feel through the other person. And he says, here's a sentence, sympathy in South India is best understood as the compassionate consequence of an uncalculating inner nature, oriented around the bonds of the past and the needs of the present. So, I mean, what does that mean? He also has other ways of talking about it, by the way. If you read the book, or he has an essay about these kinds of things, you'll see that he talks about what he calls kind of folding in, sort of a modern language, taking the outside and somehow folding it into the inside, or vice versa. Or he talks about the image of a seed. You can actually take something from the outside and plant it inside, and it'll grow inside. So these external objects of the Ulurai, they're, according to him, something like that. There are some seeds that have come inside. You can also do it the opposite. In other words, you can take an imagined internal thought or feeling and transplant it outside, and if it grows, and it should grow, then actually it'll have absolutely real effects in either case, inside or outside. He talks about folding these things. Again, in modern language, but one way to think about it. So I think that's a nice way to talk about it, but actually I think one can go a little farther. So, see, to me, when we've now spent an hour and a half a day just reading these Ururas, we have some sense of what happens, and I was very happy to see the kind of very beautiful and interesting responses to it, because you obviously know how to work with this kind of Urura, no question. Anybody who reads sensitively can do it, and you did it. That's a very impressive thing in its own way. But we wanted to try to formulate a kind of theory of how it works. So I think we have to think in terms of this notion of recursion that I mentioned yesterday. Or perhaps one might talk about involution, because you see these supposedly external objects, ask yourself where they are truly situated and where they exist. On the one hand, they probably exist outside in some realistic sense, as I've said earlier. But they inhabit a different space internally in the poem, do they not? You'll notice that the poet is never heard here. In Aham poetry, you never actually get, as far as I know, get the poet speaking as the poet. In Puram poetry, it's very common. It's heroic poetry. The poet, I saw this, I heard this, I'm telling you this. But in Aham poetry, I think the poet's voice is never heard, or almost never. I can't think of a single thing. So that means that actually you're hearing a voice of a person, a real person, inside the poem. And this person is describing something that he or she has seen, or imagined, or perceived, not in a simple way perhaps, because she usually tells us this in more than one time. We saw it in these poems. There's this continuous reference, repeated reference to these external elements, like the board, like the millid, and so on, like the mountain, the rain, all of these coming back. So I want to suggest to you that this is a recursive vision. So what does that mean? Recursivity, recursive, these are common words today, fashionable. For that very reason, I hesitate to use them. But nonetheless, in a simple way, let me just say that recursivity, this notion of recursivity, it always implies a perception which has an element of self-perception in it, that's reflexive. So one example is if you have an object and you put a mirror on this side and a mirror on the other side facing one another, that object will be reflected in a infinitely recursive series. Right? That's one way. Another way to describe it, actually it's a mathematical thought. I'm not capable of explaining to you the mathematics of recursion. But another way to describe it is if you're talking about a process, it's important that it'll be a kind of dynamic process, and that process includes a self-reference to itself as part of its own process. Like, for example, you want to make dahi, you need dahi. You can't do it, right? There's no way you can do it without that. If we were in Europe, if we were sitting in Paris or Berlin, so I wouldn't be able to say that. I would say it's like making sourdough. Sourdough is the kind of bread in the West, right? And you need sourdough in order to make sourdough. So that's recursive. It's embedded in the process of
Iterative.
what is that?
Iterative.
Yes, it's iterative. That's right. It's a kind. Mathematically, it is iterative. It fits into, I think, a wider category of iteration. But I don't know enough about it to say anything very precisely. But see, why is that important to us here? So that means, at least in my sense, what it means is when the heroine says, for example, I'm thinking of this board, or whatever. She says it over and over again. Every time she says it, it has that recursive quality, which means that there's a new perspective built into that recurrence. It's her internal perception. And that perception does have an imaginative component. So I promised I'd say something about it. Here it is. You see, these Ururai Urumams, they're suffused by imaginative activity, and they belong to the mind as a kind of what shall we call it, a domain in which these imaginative perceptions are continually being processed and reprocessed, usually with an element of self-awareness or self-reflection. Or there's another way one could say it, which is the following. You could say, and this is a commonplace in the Nyaya, Sanskrit Nyaya, that in every cognitive act, every time we talk about knowing anything at all, or feeling anything at all, there are always at least two stages. There's the knowing, and then there's the knowing that we know what we know. Nyaya has a whole long discussion. That's a recursive element. Right? And that means that we have situations here in the poetry, I'm talking about the poetry, and in the mental processes that are intrinsic to that poetry. We have elements of knowing and knowing that we know, but we also may have elements of knowing and not knowing. But that, in a way, is the more important part of it. Because actually we know all kinds of things. But there are lots of things that we know without knowing that we know them. Maybe the most important things that we know are like that, or often the most important. Yeah.
I have a question exactly about it. It's when, so if there's knowing and there's knowing that you know.
Yeah.
Then does it recurse in the other direction that there's a time of recognition that you don't know something?
Yeah.
That you've known, and that's where the element of beauty also from the poem comes?
I think so, but I don't know if we find that in Sangam poetry.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe it would be worth trying to read with that thought in mind. As a theoretical possibility in terms of cognition and all of those things, undoubtedly that's the case. And not knowing what we know is actually also a very important thing. It's a rare thing for human beings to say that. Mark Twain said, we're all ignorant, but about different things. That's a true and comforting statement. But I don't think this belongs to the Ururai Upamam. This seems to me not. Yeah, please.
When in rational thought, or like when we think the rational evaluation of this, this infinite regress of thoughts is something not pleasant. It's always painful.
Yeah.
But in this case, if you're calling this according to finite regress, it's not painful pleasure. I'm
So,
very confused.
I don't think that the recursion has to be an infinite regress. It can be an infinite regress. There's a tendency towards that, but it doesn't have to be like it. You can have recursive elements in which there's a kind of loop, sort of twist. That twist is built into this. We talked about the twist because we were talking about that element of lag or something missing, that separation. That's part of that twist that is inherent in this kind. The mathematicians like to play jokes with this idea of recursivity. Lots of people do this. For example, you could have a book and you have an index to the book. And if you look under index, if you look in the index under the word recursion, it will say see recursion. And there are many jokes like that about this kind of thing. But actually, this is not, it's not a trivial point. So I would want to, these are various possibilities. And we haven't reached the point of trying to sum up the model of the mind that we got from Sankam Poetry, maybe a little later today. But I want to suggest to you that this notion of a kind of involution, it has a recursive aspect to it, and it implies an imaginative act which is built into every perceptual moment. And every perceptual moment in a series that are constantly changing, so that you get a kind of kaleidoscopic series of superimposed and interlocking perceptions with an imaginative element. That is Urudai Upama. Yeah.
Okay, since you talk about Nyaya,
Yeah.
I feel sentence Abhasa is seen as negative, something fake.
Right.
But here it's something which is
So you know what the Nyayikas always said? They said, you should stay far away from the babblings of poets. Right? that's what logicians tend to think. But to their credit, you have to say about the Nyaya that they produced by far the most elaborate and powerful model of the mind that we have in South Asia until modern times, or maybe even including modern times. They were very interested in these kinds of questions. We should, there's tea. If we're going to have tea at all, this is the moment to have it.
10 minutes.
I just want to say, in the Abhasa,